to the Coaching Cast, your working from home managers club, here to check in with you weekly to share your remote working highs and lows, remind you that you're not alone, and acknowledge that there's many of us outside of your living room, kitchen, spare room, car, all sailing through this crazy storm together whilst trying to be the best coach, leader, manager, and human being we can be. I'm Robyn Wood, founder of Grip Corporate Coaching, personal performance coach, leader and chief eye roller when it comes to all nonsensical corporate mumbo jumbo that suffocates rather than advocates.
And I'm Suzy Hunt, business coach, leadership and sales mentor at Future You Coaching, currently taking on my hardest coaching assignment to date, parenting a 1-year-old who certainly doesn't like being questioned.
In this podcast, we aim to explore the leadership and coaching techniques required to navigate and survive the current business environment, masks and social distancing measures included. Each episode will present different topics which we will explore and discuss with support for some special guests along the way, sharing ideas, hints and tips as we go. We won't tell you what to do because we hate that, but we'll share and invite you to take away whatever you want. We hope you enjoy listening. In today's episode, we explore the hot topic of resilience, what it is, what it isn't, and how to manage, support, and grow your own to ensure that your resilience is serving you in the best way possible. It's time to sod off everyone else and just look at how kind you're being to yourself. Stay with us and enjoy. So before we get going onto today's subject of resilience, Suze, how are you? How's your week been?
So this week, I can probably summarise my week in one word, and that would be cold, in the sense of I've just felt cold for it feels like forever. So I feel like I've permanently got like a blanket over my legs like an old lady, or attached to a hot water bottle in some shape or form. So yeah, it's been absolutely freezing. I feel like I've just been living in the Arctic for the last week or so. So that's been happening, a highlight of lockdown. And also the Poo Chronicles have cropped up again. So anybody who listened to episode 3 will know that, I had a bit of a situation with my little boy in regards to pooing in the bath. We haven't had another poo in the bath incident, but we have had another poo incident. So I was just like, is this actually a joke? But yeah, so the Poo Chronicles continue, that's for sure. So don't worry, I won't be talking about poo every time we have a podcast, I hope. They certainly have continued in the last week or so. So a bit random, I have to say, in terms of my week. How's your week been?
Well, I've got an update on my early starts. So I know in the last episode I talked about, in respect of motivating and energizing myself, practicing the art of actually getting up in the morning. So that's definitely going well. It's getting better. I haven't managed to jump out of bed yet, Suze, as per your recommendation, but I'm getting out of bed. So that's good. And always before 9 o'clock. So that's a bonus. And then other than that, I think what I've struggled with a little bit this past week is the rather unhelpful task of, or practice rather than task, of comparing myself to other people. And I think it's been in relation to reflecting on 2020 and the frustrations I think I experienced a lot with last year, and not in my head being where I feel I should be as we go into 2021. And I'm sure many people can relate to that because of how the pandemic has stopped us all from doing things we wanted to do, halted plans, ruined plans. And I have been really guilty this week of spending far too much time on social media, LinkedIn as well, and looking at all these people that I think are absolutely smashing it and being superheroes, and just thinking, oh God, I'm not doing enough. I'm not as successful as I would like to be. If someone looks at my CV, would they just think, oh God, she should be further on already? And so, yeah, I've not been that helpful to myself at times this week. And we'll talk a bit more about that later, actually, on this subject of resilience, because I do think it's really relevant.
Yeah.
And some of the suggestions that I make, tips and recommendations, are actually those that I should actually just follow myself a hell of a lot more, and that I will hold my hands up and say I'm guilty of not always doing very consistently. But hell, we're all a work in progress. So I've definitely been a bit guilty of some unhelpful comparisons this week. And then the other thing that happened this week, and actually I'm still stumped by it, it's another food related one, another middle class food related one. So I've talked about cashews before. This week it was Jerusalem artichokes.
Oh my goodness me.
So what I'm doing is I'm not sure I've had a normal artichoke or a Jerusalem artichoke. I also don't know if all artichokes are Jerusalem, and also, are they from Jerusalem, and is that why they're called Jerusalem artichokes? Anyway, that stumped me this week. I haven't really got to the bottom of that one yet.
Well, I can't probably help you on that subject, but if any of our listeners know anything further around a Jerusalem artichoke, then please let Lisa know.
Yeah, so middle class. I'm trying to be relatable to people, and all I talk about is all these weird and wonderful foods. Let's get back to the boring potato. Excellent. Okay, should we get chatting about today's topic of resilience?
Let's do it.
So in today's episode, we're exploring the topic of resilience, a topic which suddenly appears to be everywhere and being discussed by everyone, especially now that the pandemic continues into 2021 and we're experiencing our third lockdown during a particularly tough, cold, wet winter in the UK. I've studied resilience periodically over the years, but have found some really interesting new theories and arguments in the most recent weeks. And I'm going to talk about one of those sources of information right now, actually, because I think it's a really interesting debate that's been raised. So I was poring over Instagram last week, and I found this really interesting article featured there that was published by Stylist Online, written by Amanda Nichols. So this was released on the 26th of January. And the article caught my eye because obviously we're talking about resilience today and I was preparing for that. But it was because of the title, which was entitled, "We hear the word resilience a lot these days, but have we got its meaning all wrong?" So just to summarize quickly, the article really challenges the balance of focus and accountability for resilience. So Nichols quotes cognitive behavioural therapist Jerry Serrell. "It's placing the blame at the level of the individual and their insecurity, sensationalised media coverage, consequences of contagion, uncertainty regarding rules and the future." Jerry Serrell goes on to say, "It's sought out as a means to mediate and buffer the significant uncertainties we are increasingly being exposed to. It's become a sort of badge of honour." Nichols' belief is that the focus should be on fixing the sources of the problems that's creating this need for increased resilience, and not passing the responsibility onto the individual to just cope better. Because actually, the more we're being asked to cope with, the more it's degrading our resilience over time because of the increasing amount that's being put on us. And therefore, any resilience that we do have is potentially being worn away. So I thought this was a really interesting debate to start from Amanda Nichols in this particular article. And I thought it'd be a good place for us to start here on this particular subject today. So Suze, what are your thoughts on this view from Nichols in respect of resilience?
Yeah, it's an interesting article. I agree with you on that. When I read it, it definitely offers a viewpoint that not many of us have considered before. Certainly I hadn't. So it's definitely worth a read, and we'll post it on our show notes and on our Instagram, so you can go and have a read if you'd like to. But an element of it, which I also kind of wanted to kind of explore or bring out of it as well, was Nichols writes, "If we were all just become more resilient, then the status quo isn't challenged to evolve, but instead the people under pressure to maintain it are." And I do think that there's something in that around looking and acknowledging about the why. So the reason why the status quo is what it is, or the reason why I keep finding myself in a particular situation. And I do think that there's something in that around looking and acknowledging about the why. So the reason why, the status quo is what it is, or the reason why I keep finding myself in a particular situation. And that's, I think, one of the things that we need to ask ourselves sometimes. So what's the reason I keep finding myself in the position where I'm continuously, for example, dealing with challenge at work? Or what's the reason why I continuously find this person quite difficult to communicate with or engage with? And I think there is something around asking ourselves those questions and being clear with ourselves that we're not just going along with things for the sake of going along with things, that they are actually relevant and true and real. But after reading the article, I would say that in my experience, I still think that resilience is needed in the workplace. I think it still has a huge, and in life actually, it still has a huge role to play. I don't think we can just purely focus in on that status quo and questioning that. And it feeds into kind of how we learn and what is often required sometimes in positive change in our lives as well, because there's an element of resilience within that. So for example, when we get promoted, we need an element of resilience because we're doing new things that we haven't necessarily done before, or we enter a new career chapter in our careers, again, because we're learning and we're growing within that. And resilience and how we bounce back from some of the challenges that we face plays into that as well. So for me, I think Amanda raises a really interesting point, but it fundamentally goes kind of hand in hand with the need for resilience in the workplace and in our kind of general lives at the moment, because it really is our ability to kind of not dwell on things. Resilience is our ability to choose how we respond. And I think when we make a conscious effort around how we're going to react and how we're going to move forward, it tells our brain that we can actually embrace change. And that's quite an important trigger. And how we kind of take action is our anchor around how we bounce back into scenarios and from situations. And that kind of all improves our optimism. It helps us with our kind of communication, our engagement, our motivation. And so, yeah, I kind of keep coming back to it, but I think it's an interesting perspective, but the two things need to be balanced together. Both that kind of understanding of the status quo and the why, so that we don't lose the benefit of questioning that when it's appropriate. But also, we shouldn't be lauding resilience around as this badge of honor or something to be chased. It's not a destination, and those two things kind of go hand in hand for me.
No, I think I really like your perspective of exploring the why from the sense of looking at repeated patterns.
Yes.
Which I think is really interesting and very true. When I looked at the article and I read it, what continually came into my mind was the topic of locus of control, because I think the article, where it's focusing in on the why and the why that should be challenged, actually the examples given from my perspective, very much from my opinion, felt like areas that actually are so big and so, at times, I feel far removed from me in terms of the wider political situation, the wider work society situation, that it felt very much for me around, well, those things are out of my control directly. And generally, when it comes to reviewing situations, scenarios, triggers, that is what I tend to look at first, which is, well, what is within the locus of my control? What can I affect and change? And I'm very much someone who believes that everything is within my control based on how I choose to perceive it. And that comes down to what you mentioned about how you choose to react.
Yeah.
And I think about this in terms of how I've built and grown my personal resilience throughout my life. And I really think that my growth of resilience, my journey began when I was a teenager, because my mum suffered really terribly with a mental health illness for a lot of my teenage years. And as I grew older and turned 18, became an adult, my feelings towards her illness were very much ones of anger, frustration. I think a lot of that was hormonal, but I think it was also to do with feeling so out of control of that situation. And the only way I could react to it was just to be really angry. And I was angry at her. There was a lot of, slammed doors, not talking to each other. But over time, what I really learned was actually that was only worsening the situation for myself and obviously my mum as well. But how it made me feel, I was already feeling rubbish, and actually it made me feel worse. And what I really started to learn about was how I could choose to respond to the situation when actually it was completely out of my control, and to a huge extent my mum's. And I think that's true actually of illness in general. And obviously that feels very relevant at the moment in the situation that we're in with COVID, that actually, yes, obviously there are things we're being asked to do. That's why we're in lockdown. That's why we're isolating, to try and help take control back from the virus and reduce the risk of catching it. But ultimately, we could all still become ill in some form. And I do think it's how you choose to respond to it that makes all the difference. And trying to look at it in respect of what you can do, not what you can't, and identify the action, and even in some respects the positives, because, and this may sound a little bit morbid or even a bit odd to people, but obviously I don't wish my mum to have been ill. I'm sad for her more than anyone else that happened. But I take so many positives away from that situation, and that is all that I tend to take away from it now. I don't look back on it and feel sad or angry or frustrated at all now. I actually see it in terms of what I learned through that whole process. And I know you just spoke about what, taking learnings away is so crucial, I think, both in a work context especially, but as also in personal. Because actually all I think about now is that I have a whole side of me that is much more open-minded, much more accepting, much more comfortable with conversations about mental illness or mental health or mental wellness of any kind. It doesn't have to be clinical. I actually think in many ways the reason I actually became a coach in the end was because of what happened all those years ago, because somewhere within me I had this desperate want to support people to feel great about themselves and to get better connected to their mental strength and capabilities. And I think that's where that came from. So I've only taken good learnings away from it, really. And that tends to be then how I look at most situations going forward. It's even when it's really awful, what can be done and how do we move on?
Yeah. And I think as well, like, resilience is an ever evolving thing. Like I said before, it's not a destination. So this kind of badge of honor that they talk about in the article, I see it as kind of like you have this big pot, maybe like a cauldron. Go with me on this.
I'm going with you on it. Stick with the cauldron.
And all your life experiences, whether that's in work, out of work, or flow into this kind of big pot of resilience. And actually, the more experiences you have and the learns you have, the content, just levels up, and it's all just kind of there, ready for when you need to kind of tap into it and use it. And all those experiences in your life just help you fill up your cauldron.
Your cauldron, yes. I've got this mental image now of a cauldron.
Yes,
I like it. I'm a very visual person, so this works for me.
If you've just tuned in, we haven't lost the plot yet.
Still listening to the coaching cast.
But I think that that represents a way of, I suppose, demonstrating resilience for me, that it's an ever moving, ever changing thing, and we need to use it sometimes in very different ways. And I think in the last 12 months or so, we've had to use it even more than we've probably ever done. And the way that people will have used their personal resilience, both at work and in their personal lives, will be different. And yeah, it's an interesting topic for sure.
Definitely. So talking about further exploration of the subject of resilience and what's being discussed out there at the moment, when I was exploring this article from Nichols and her debate around that area we should focus of why this is happening and how we should address the balance of actually where we focus our efforts on resilience, another topic that I identified and really liked actually was one around self-compassion in relation to resilience. So rather than the old school thought about self-critique and how self-critique supports growth in resilience, there is an increasing argument that actually, no, it's not about criticizing yourself. It's about being kind to yourself. So there is a professor at the University of Texas. So this is a lady called Kristin Neff, and she is the Associated Professor of Educational Psychology. And she's conducted years of research into the subject of resilience and found that self-compassion, so treating yourself as you would your best friend, increases emotional resilience, health, well-being, and productivity. And I've quoted Neff here. She states, "Accept and honour your humanness." So in other words, and I apologise because I'm going to swear here, accept that shit happens and seek to find the learnings to prevent future repeats of the same mistakes, rather than beating yourself up over it, which only increases the stress you're under. And I think we've talked a little bit about that already, about identifying the learnings. So in respect of self-compassion and resilience, what's your experience of this, Suze?
So when I was thinking about this ahead of talking about it today, I kept coming back to this one story and kind of one experience in my life. And that was when my little boy was born a couple of years ago now. So I had just obviously had a baby, and he got taken quite seriously poorly pretty much instantly after he was born. So I didn't get to hold him, and I didn't really see him for that long before he was kind of taken off into special care. And he was in ICU for the kind of first couple of weeks of his life. And I had obviously was recovering from surgery. I had left him in hospital to come home, and we were kind of traveling back in every day to see him and look after him and to kind of just be with him. And I think when I look back on it now, that's probably the time in my life where I've had to dig the deepest I've ever dug in terms of my personal resilience. So getting kind of up every day, I was recovering from surgery, getting dressed, seeing his nursery without him in it at home, getting in the car, walking into hospital, seeing people leave with their babies, and knowing that, my little boy was incredibly unwell. And I think, overcoming some of those kind of thoughts and feelings where I could have easily, and I did at times, but I think beat myself up and critique myself about why that had happened to me and did I have a role to play within that. And I think, it was an incredibly tough situation. I can't sit here and say it wasn't. And like I said, I think it took great levels of resilience for me to go to that hospital every day, but I knew I had to. That was my role now. That's what I had to do. But in terms of that like self-care angle, I think that did play into things for me, definitely. So I needed to like not think about other challenges like in life. So when people were like, do you want me to drop something off so you don't have to like cook dinner, I'd be like, yes, absolutely. Can I walk the dog for you? I'd be like, yes. So I said yes quite a lot. And I think that really helped me with that self-care piece. So I didn't have to think about other things other than just him. And I kind of became quite single-minded in those weeks around what my purpose and my role was now. And it was all about looking after him as much as I could and being there for him. And so I became quite single-minded, I think, in that focus. But that really helped me as well around not putting too much pressure on myself to do different things. And you know, if I didn't reply to somebody's message or return their call or what have you, I just wanted to be kind of as compassionate towards myself as I possibly could. And then I wouldn't necessarily label this as self-care, but there's this one kind of element of that I kind of sticks out in my mind. It was like one Saturday night in October, and I remember just eating a McDonald's, watching Strictly in the parents' lounge of the special care unit that my little boy was in. Just kind of like saying hi and just like chatting to fellow parents. And I think at that time, I remember just thinking like, I really wanted to eat at McDonald's and I just really just wanted to watch Strictly Come Dancing. But looking back on it now, it's just really surreal. But I think I needed to just have a level of normality within this completely crazy situation. You know, and I would say hi and we would chat to people that we would see every day. And I remember there was this one couple that, you know, their little boy was also incredibly poorly. But we were kind of, you know, chatting to them and trying to kind of have a little bit of laughter along the way, like when we would see them in the morning, just because we were in this crazy surreal environment, but it allowed us to just have a bit of kind of a break and that kind of self-care of not just taking it all completely as seriously as it probably was. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying making light of it or making, you know, taking away from how serious that situation was, but I think it definitely showed me that I was more resilient than I thought I could be, and that actually I had put in some things around self-care, which I probably didn't realize until I reflected upon it. And I think it took me a good few months before I could talk about it and talk about what I'd been through and the learns from that situation. And so what I would say is, don't be too hard on yourself. If you're going through something and you want to build your resilience, you need to do it in your own time. And, you know, I think giving yourself permission to reflect is really, really crucial, but doing it in the time that's right for you. And being able to do that took me quite a long time, but I did get there, and it has given me some, again, you know, if I think about my cauldron of resilience, it's given me some great, you know, experiences to kind of tap into when I need it, you know, moving forward. But it did take me a while to kind of get to that point of being able to draw a line and reflect on it and take those learnings forward. So don't be too hard on yourself if you find that, you know, you can't quite do that yet, I suppose is my point.
And that's really poignant, I think. Thank you so much for sharing the story and talking about it. It's so insightful and so powerful hearing you talk about it all and what you went through. And I think your point around the timing of reflection is so key. I think I often want to reflect immediately because I just want to move on. And that's my personal preference. But I will admit at times, I know I'm doing it possibly when I'm not ready to.
Yeah.
And actually, I create another layer of pressure on myself when I'm already under pressure and stressed because of whatever's happened. But I think I just often want to change how I feel about the situation so much that I just rush it just to get the hell out of there. And I do think that's an area I could benefit from focusing on. I think also, and this probably relates a little bit to what we've already talked about and possibly the sentiment of the article actually in respect of the debate about the balance of resilience and who's to own it or not. I think part of what that was speaking about was the unhealthy relentlessness of being asked to be resilient.
Yes.
And I do think taking time to have a break, create space when you're having to be resilient, when things are happening to you, is actually so much a part of what helps to grow your resilience, and in a way that actually is helpful rather than being unhelpful. And what you said there about even in that situation with your little boy when you're actually in the hospital, taking time to go home, taking time even in the hospital to have some normality, have the McDonald's, watch Strictly, gives you moments of space and breaks to give you those moments just to reset a little bit. And I know when I think about the toughest times I've had to go through, there were still moments of laughter in that. And it was those moments, and actually those moments, if you like, of respite that really helped me just to take a breath and have a little bit of a pause before having to get back into it all over again. I think that's so important. And I know we've talked about keeping a focus on your energy levels and rest to support us in other times and other areas of importance. I think actually that underpins so much of everything. But I do think, I know I heavily rely on humour to get me through things. and to be honest, you know, when I talking about my family and our experience with mental health, we laugh a lot as a family, and we actually laugh a lot about all the things that have ever gone wrong. You know, it's how we deal with that, actually.
I think that's a really interesting point about how you deal with it. So, you know, I think if you lead teams or manage individuals, and we've said this a lot on this podcast, but just being aware that everybody is different. So actually for some people, they may build their resilience through distraction, and actually work may be a distraction for them. So don't necessarily assume that work is like another problem for them or another thing that's going to, you know, make them have to be more resilient if they're going through something, say personally, for example. Actually, you know, it might not be. So it's, again, what's right for that person. And I think I would really encourage you to explore that again with your team in your next one-to-one, because that just gives you more insight around how you lead them more effectively. And if you know equally that they're a person which, when things get a bit tough either at work or at home, and they actually may benefit more from some time out, you can help them explore whether that's an option and how you kind of facilitate that. But equally, that might not work for someone either. So yeah, I think, you know, knowing what it is that works for you, but also for others, is important.
Yeah, well said. I think it comes back to that. Just don't assume you know. Yeah. Don't assume you understand, because you don't. You can't. You're not that person.
Yeah,
and you have to ask the questions, and you have to give the time to explore it.
You have to ask the questions, people.
Definitely. So when I was thinking about self-care, I know that I can be my worst enemy a lot of the time. And I know when I spoke in the start of this particular episode about how I've been feeling this past week, that unhelpful comparison to others is definitely something I've done too much of this last week. And I think generally I can be quite guilty of it. And it's not in any other context, actually, other than work and in careers. I don't do it outside of that, actually. It's just when I see other people being really successful, females, it's always females, I compare myself to women, who I just think, oh, wow, they're so successful, especially when I know they're the same age as me, or maybe younger, worse. I immediately start thinking, I'm not working hard enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not trying hard enough. And so actually, I've been really trying to practice my skills in self-compassion a lot in the past week to help myself and to care for myself. Because actually, the more that you do that, the more you have the strength to be able to be productive. And that's exactly the research that Kristen Neff at the University of Texas has highlighted. Actually, those of us who are much more self-compassionate are a lot more productive. And that's not surprising, because I actually think self-critique, especially really unhelpful, negative, can completely stop you in your tracks. It halts things. It's so counterproductive. So I was thinking, well, what do I do when I know that I'm going into these unhelpful patterns of thought and behavior? And actually, an exercise that I do for myself, and actually I practice it on my clients and those I've worked with before. And it's something I learned during my neuro-linguistic programming training. So it's an NLP technique, is a timeline exercise. So you can do this physically in NLP. I think they generally do. They move their client through the room. I do this on a piece of paper. No, and that may be because I'm lazy, but it's also because at times it can be a lot more practical.
Yeah.
But literally taking yourself as far back in the past as you can remember, or you would like to in terms of relevancy, and then moving forwards to the present day, stopping at every moment that is memorable to you of a time when you've been successful, and then highlighting it. Now, you can do this for lots of things. You can do it if you're trying to support somebody to highlight to themselves that they're capable, that they've got the skills, that they can be successful if they're in a place of feeling the opposite. It can be if someone's feeling really miserable and depressed and unhappy, and they're trying to identify moments in their life when they have been happy so they can understand, well, why was I happy and what can I do more of that? But essentially it's for two reasons. One, it helps to anchor you in moments where you felt your best, that you can then recall quicker going forwards when you're in moments of real despair, I guess, to be sounding a bit dramatic, but moments where you're feeling down, as well as giving you the opportunity to reflect on, well, what happened then and what did I do? So it comes back to this notion of learning. What can I learn about that to help me right now? It's such a helpful exercise. But what essentially it does is it demonstrates to you, you are successful, you can do this, you have got the resources, acknowledge the experience you've gained. Actually, it's a great way in relation completely to resilience. Look at what you've survived before, therefore you can again. So really great. So I've been doing some of that. I think I've also been reminding myself, and actually I have seen this being quoted in many different spaces at the moment, about the fact that we're all on different paths and someone else's path is not going to be the same as mine. So when I'm comparing myself to somebody else, well, how can I? Because we're completely different, especially someone like, who was I comparing myself to the other day that was probably quite unhelpful? Well, Amanda Gorman, the incredible 20-year-old who wrote the poem for the American inauguration. I can't say that word. Inauguration. I think that's how they describe it. As I said, I think I posted on my LinkedIn personal profile. I'm pretty sure at 22 years old, I was hungover and, not doing something as incredible as this.
Oh, I definitely was.
But I think it's always remembering you're completely different people. You're on different paths. At no stage have I attempted to become a poet. It was a stupid comparison, but there we go.
At any stage has she, tried to become a podcast extraordinaire?
I think it's on the way. I think she will become a podcast extraordinaire.
Yeah, but it's not quite there yet, and you are.
True. Well, thank you very much, Suzy. Cheers for that. No problem. Boost me up. So yeah, I think, trying to be inspired by other people rather than don't be intimidated by other people. So those incredible women that I've been following and in getting involved even actually in some of their activities the past week, I've been trying to look at it in terms of what can I learn from them? How can I mirror what they've done? If there are things that I would like to do myself, actually, can I reach out and speak to them? Can I ask them to be a mentor? Trying to look at things from that angle. So not being intimidated by them, but being inspired by them. And, look, some days I get this right. Most of the days, probably not. I'm only human. I'm definitely a work in progress. But I think it's that recognizing that you're not finished. You're always growing. And you're going to get things wrong, and that's okay as well. And look, I'm saying all this out loud because when I fail at anything, I feel wretched. It's only when I take the time, as you've suggested, Suzy, to pause, reflect, do I allow myself to give myself a bit of a pat on the back and say, look, it's all right. It didn't necessarily go to plan, but that doesn't matter. And what are you going to do differently next time? It's all okay.
Sorry, I think Arthur's toy just went off.
I was going to say, I loved it. I was like, something went off there in the background. Felt like another cheer for me, woo, you've got this, Lisa. Rah. Loved it. Thanks for that. I appreciated it. Sound effects included in this podcast. Yeah, we are working from home at the end
real,
of it.
Guys.
Yeah, we are real. So
yeah, I think just one final thing from me, actually, just to kind of build on what you said. Yeah. Resilience is such an intangible thing. And so it can be hard to know when we're displaying it. So actually don't be too hard on yourself, because I think until, you are in it, you don't necessarily know that that's what you've been demonstrating. There'll be challenges, I'm sure, in the last couple of months, which you've overcome, and you probably don't even realize or know you have. So it's really hard to know, like I said, when we've done it, and I said it before and I'll keep saying, but it's so personal to that person 100%. And how you build, and all of those different experiences, is how you'll build that kind of resilience piece.
Size doesn't matter.
Exactly. In this
context, size does not matter when it comes to resilience. Oh, so we've got today's top tips. Number 1, review your situations and identify unhelpful patterns. Break them. Number 2, resilience is different for all. Build tailored plans for individuals, including yourself. 3, avoid unhelpful comparisons. Be inspired, not intimidated. And 4, because we threw a cheeky one in, remind yourself what you have achieved, not what you haven't.
So it's now time for this week's listener question. This is where you, the listener, send us your workplace dilemmas or questions, and we try and answer them and offer some suggestions. So this week's question is from Scott in Kent.
Hi Lisa and Suzy, my name is Scott and I'm from Kent. Today I'm looking for some advice. The company I work for has recently gone for a large restructure, and in doing so has limited potential promotion and growth opportunities for what I can assume is the next 18 months to 2 years. My question to you today is, do I look elsewhere or stay with my current company in hope of the promotion and the growth opportunities in the not too distant future? Thank you very much.
Cool.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks very much.
Okay. I'm sure this will be a question that a lot of people can relate to actually at the moment. So I think there's probably a couple of things that I would suggest that might help you, Scott. So the first being, I think exploring the assumption in your question there. So you said, I'm assuming this will kind of limit my opportunity for growth and promotion for 18 months to 2 years. And I think exploring whether that is a valid assumption or potentially disproving it as an assumption. So I would say maybe try and chat to senior leaders, key stakeholders, and try and get their view on if they think that that's actually going to be an issue. And also, one of the things with change is that a change program often does actually bring opportunities down the line. It's just not maybe necessarily always there once it straight away. So actually, as things evolve and bed in with the new structure, you might find that some opportunities for growth and promotion kind of come through. So that would be the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is try and maybe write down all the things that are important to you in a job. So that can be a mixture of different things. So for example, work-life balance, earning a certain salary, growth in a job, things that you enjoy doing, what your strengths are. Create a column with your current role, and then potentially a column with jumping ship and kind of going somewhere else. And then work your way through each of those things and kind of tick off what each of those scenarios delivers against. So you're kind of doing a bit of a pros and cons for those two different options that you've got there. So that would be my kind of second suggestion is look at what's important to you and what you value out of a job, and if your current situation is delivering that for you. And then finally, so this isn't an area of expertise that Lisa and I kind of specialize in, but maybe a career coach might be somebody who's really helpful for you. And we can, if help you kind of unpick the situation and your kind of thinking in this area, and help you kind of think about what is right for you in your next step. But we certainly know people who are, so please get in contact. We can definitely recommend some people that you might want to have a think about working with. And also there's a great podcast you might want to take a listen to called Your Bravo Career Podcast. That's got some great hints and tips for anybody looking for a career change as well. So go and maybe check that out. But yeah, they're probably my 3 top suggestions. I hope that's helpful, Scott.
Great stuff. I think to build on what Suzy said, I think the point around assumption is a great one. Actually seek the facts. I actually would say this is more about what you really want, and what's happening with the company is actually just a distraction. So I'm going to do my Spice Girls routine, but I think it's a matter of saying, not literally, I'm not going to like jump into song, but I think in terms of the question I would ask yourself is, what do I want? And then ask it to yourself, yes, but what do I really want? And then ask it to yourself a third time, yes, but what do I really, really want?
Yeah, I like it.
And really be honest with yourself about what's important to you. Going into the detail that Suzy's just recommended in terms of looking at the pros and cons is a great next step to that. Then that's brilliant. But ultimately, you may not even want to stay at that company. And that's what you learn. Therefore, whatever's going on there is actually irrelevant. So I think it's coming back to what we've talked a lot about in this podcast, because whatever's happening in the wider organisation, you can't control.
Yeah.
Great
Brilliant
stuff.
I hope that gives you a few things to go away and have a think about. If those of you who are listening have your own thoughts for Scott, or would also like to share a question, please do get in touch. You can email us at hello@thecoachingcast.co.uk, or send us a message on Instagram at thecoachingcast.
It's now time for Bullshit Bingo, where we call out phrases which get commonly used in the workplace or in life, actually, which makes us cringe. Today's Bullshit Bingo is new normal, in the context of the new situation or environment we find ourselves living in. We actually mentioned this in the first episode for anyone who listened to the pilot. And we talked about how we don't like this particular phrase. So we're talking about it more in depth here. But yeah, so new normal. God, doesn't feel that new now.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think it's just the norm now. I don't think there's a new element attached to it. I think when we go back to some resemblance of back to kind of pre-COVID pandemic life, that will be the new normal.
Yeah, exactly. It changes all the time. I actually heard someone in many ways rephrase this, and I much preferred it, and it felt more relevant to the situation we're living in, which is always changing. And that was the next normal.
Oh, okay.
And I quite liked that.
Yeah, I like that actually.
It also felt a bit more palatable for me, because I don't like this normal. So newness, generally I associate new with exciting, different, fun, glossy, shiny. I mean, there's nothing glossy or shiny about this. And so new to me feels like a positive, optimistic word. And the fact it keeps getting referred to in this situation, just they don't correlate. They really jar with each other. So I prefer next normal, especially because it gives me this kind of hope that it will keep changing and we will move past this, and therefore things can only get better. So there's nothing new about it anymore.
No.
Today's a new normal compared to yesterday, especially with the weather changing.
It's been like nearly a year. There's nothing new about it anymore. It's kind of like when you would move into a new job and you're like, I'm new in this job.
I definitely milked that for a long time. I love being new. I like to forgive myself for being new, but yeah, you're right. I definitely overdid it. I think I got to 12 months and it wasn't acceptable anymore. So we're coming to the end of today's episode, where we've discussed resilience and what it means today in 2021. Our tips from today for you to try are: review your situations and identify unhelpful patterns and break them. Resilience is different for all. Build tailored plans for individuals. Number 3, avoid unhelpful comparisons. Be inspired, not intimidated. And 4, the cheeky 4th one, Remind yourself what you have achieved, not what you haven't. In addition to our top tips, we've got some questions for you to ask yourself to help build and grow some of the topics and ideas that we've discussed today. So the questions we've got, number 1 is practice being more compassionate to yourself. When something goes wrong, ask yourself, what would I tell my best friend if this were him or her in this scenario? Number 2, allow yourself to feel what you are feeling without judgment, accepting that shit happens. And then ask yourself, when you're ready, what have I learnt? And then finally, question 3, ask yourself, what will I do differently next time? Ask this for yourself, practice with you, and then also utilise with other people you manage and lead to help them better connect and understand their own resilience and how they too can grow. We hope you enjoyed today and have some new ideas to take away and try for yourselves. If you have any questions, thoughts, or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact us at hello@thecoachingcast.co.uk or on Instagram @thecoachingcast.
Your support means everything. Therefore, if you like what you've heard today, then please give us a like, subscribe, and also comment, and we will get all the updates on our future episodes. Wherever you listen to your podcasts, you can find us. In our next episode, we'll be discussing the topic of dealing with change.
We both love music and use it to motivate and energise us. So we like to finish each episode with our personal song recommendation, giving you positivity and energy as you launch into your next Zoom or team meeting. My choice this week is Lifetime by Romy from the XX. Absolute banger. I've been dancing around to it for the last week.
Great tune.
So good. Thanks very much for listening. Have a great week. And remember, you got this.
You've got this.